Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you try, nothing ever changes, like you're running full speed, but your life stays in the same place? Because 3 years ago, a young man named Lucas Bennett stood exactly there watching someone else sign a contract worth more money than he had ever seen in his life. And what made it worse was not the money, it was the realization that he had been given the same 24 hours, the same chances, the same starting line, but somehow ended up invisible. Lucas was the kind of person people overlooked, not because he wasn't capable, but because he never seemed to prove it. He worked small jobs around the city, carrying boxes, cleaning floors, trying sales positions that never lasted longer than a few weeks. His shoes were worn, his shirts slightly too big, like they had belonged to someone else. And every morning, he told himself today will be different, but by the end of the day, nothing was different. Customers ignored him, managers lost patience, and coworkers quietly stopped expecting anything from him until one afternoon, everything collapsed in a single moment. Lucas stood inside a small retail store, trying to sell a simple product, $5, nothing complicated, just a basic item. But the words wouldn't come out right. His voice stumbled, his confidence cracked, and the customer walked away without even looking back. The manager sighed, not angry, just disappointed, like he had already made up his mind about Lucas a long time ago, and in that quiet tone that somehow hurt more than shouting, he said, "Maybe this just isn't for you." Lucas nodded because he didn't have anything left to argue with, and as he stepped outside into the late afternoon air, he felt something heavier than failure. It wasn't just losing another job, it was the growing belief that maybe everyone else was right, maybe he wasn't built for more, maybe some people were meant to watch while others moved forward. And for the first time, he didn't feel angry, he felt tired of trying, tired of hoping, tired of waking up every day expecting change and going to bed with the same empty results. And that was the moment when most people would have accepted their place and quietly settled into a smaller life. But Lucas didn't know yet that this exact moment, standing on a cracked sidewalk with nothing in his pocket and no plan for tomorrow, was about to lead him to something that would rewrite everything he believed about himself and about success forever. That night, Lucas did not go home right away. He walked without direction through streets that were still alive with noise, neon signs flickering over storefronts, people laughing, carrying bags filled with things he could not afford, and every step felt heavier than the last, because for the first time he was not thinking about what to try next, he was thinking about giving up completely. He passed a bookstore tucked between a laundromat and a closed diner, the kind of place most people would not notice. A small sign in the window read "Used Books, Rare Finds," and something made him stop. Maybe it was the quiet, maybe it was the way the light inside felt different, warm, and still compared to the restless city outside. He pushed the door open, and a small bell rang above him. The air smelled like paper and time. Behind the counter stood an older man, not dressed like a businessman, not impressive in any obvious way, but his eyes were sharp, like he saw more than he said. Lucas did not speak at first. He just wandered between the shelves, running his fingers along the spines of books he could not name, until the man said, "Looking for something, or trying to find something?" Lucas let out a small breath. "I think I am just trying to figure out why nothing works for me." The man studied him for a moment, then walked slowly to a corner and pulled out a small wooden box, worn at the edges like it had been opened and closed for years. He placed it on the counter and opened it carefully. Inside were several rolled scrolls tied with thin cords. The paper looked aged, not fragile, but carried with care. Lucas frowned. "What are those?" The man smiled slightly. "These are not for everyone," he said. "Most people read them like information, and nothing happens if you read them differently, and everything changes." Lucas felt a strange mix of curiosity and doubt. "They are just words, right?" The man shook his head slowly. "Words are never just words. If they are repeated enough, they become something else." Lucas hesitated. He had read books before, watched videos, listened to advice. None of it had changed anything. Why would this be different? But something about the way the man spoke was not trying to convince him. It was simply stating a fact, like gravity or time. "How much are they?" Lucas asked. The man looked at him, then at his worn shoes and tired eyes, and said, "Take them and come back in 30 days. If they change, nothing. You owe me nothing. If they change everything, you will know what they are worth." Lucas stood there for a moment, holding the weight of that offer. It was not about money, it was about belief, and he realized he had nothing left to lose. He took the scrolls, walked out into the night, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something unfamiliar, not confidence, not certainty, but the smallest spark of possibility. Lucas did not open the scrolls right away. He carried them back to his small apartment and placed them on the table as if they were something fragile, something that might disappear if he moved. Too quickly the room was quiet except for the faint hum of an old fan in the corner, and for a moment, he just stared at them wondering if this was another mistake, another distraction, another thing that would promise change and deliver nothing finally. He sat down, untied the first cord, and slowly unrolled the paper. The words were simple, almost too simple, nothing complicated, nothing impressive, nothing that sounded like a secret to success. It read like something anyone could have written, and that frustrated him. He read the first scroll once, then twice, then 3 times, waiting for something to click, for something to feel different. But nothing happened. The room looked the same, his life felt the same, and by the time he finished the second scroll, he leaned back in his chair and let out a quiet laugh. This is it, he whispered. This is what is supposed to change everything. The next morning, he woke up later than he planned, the scrolls still sitting on the table, exactly where he left them. He grabbed one on his way out, read a few lines quickly, and shoved it back into his bag, as if checking a box, as if that alone should be enough to make something happen. He spent the day walking into small businesses asking for work, trying to sell himself the same way he always had, and the results were exactly the same: polite rejections, short conversations, people who lost interest before he even finished speaking. By the afternoon, he felt that familiar weight again, the same frustration, the same question, why does nothing work for me? When he got back home, he tossed the scrolls onto the table more out of habit than care. Maybe the old man was wrong, he thought. Maybe this was just another story people tell themselves to feel better. He picked one up again, almost out of annoyance, and read the same lines he had read the night before. The words had not changed, but something about his reaction did. He noticed how quickly he rushed through them, how little attention he gave them, how he treated them like instructions instead of something to understand. He read slower this time, not searching for a secret, but simply observing the words, and for a brief moment he felt something shift, not a breakthrough, not an answer, just a pause, like his mind had stopped running in circles, and in that small silence, he realized something uncomfortable. He had not truly tried. He had only repeated the same pattern, expecting a different result. He closed the scroll and sat there longer than usual, staring at nothing in particular, and for the first time the question was not why is this not working, the question was am I even doing this differently? Lucas sat in the quiet of his apartment longer than he had in years, not distracted, not reaching for his phone, not searching for the next idea, and for the first time he felt uncomfortable, not because something was wrong, but because nothing was numbing the truth. He picked up the scroll again, and this time he did not read it like a checklist. He read it slowly, then out loud. The words felt strange, leaving his mouth, almost unnatural, like they did not belong to him, and that was when it hit him. He had been treating every piece of advice, every book, every idea the same way: read it, understand it, move on, expecting change without becoming anything different. He looked around his room, the same worn shoes by the door, the same thin mattress, the same life repeating itself, and he realized nothing around him was the problem. It was him repeating the same version of himself every single day, expecting a different result. He stood up, paced the room, and read the line again. Words repeated, shaped the man, and this time he did not just hear it, he felt the weight of it. What if the problem was not that he lacked skill or talent? What if the problem was that he never stayed with anything long enough to let it change him? He had always moved on too quickly. One job to another, one idea to the next, one attempt followed by quitting before anything had time to grow. And suddenly all his past failures did not feel like bad luck. They felt like unfinished attempts. He sat back down, held the scroll in both hands, and made a decision that felt small, but different from anything he had done before. He would not move on. He would not rush to the next thing. He would stay with this one line until something changed, not around him, but inside him. The next morning when he woke up, he did something unfamiliar. He read the same words again, slowly, then again, until the rhythm of the sentence started to settle into his mind. As he got dressed, he repeated it quietly. As he walked outside, he repeated it again, not perfectly, not confidently, but consistently. And when he spoke to the first person that day, his voice still shook, his words still stumbled, but something was slightly different. He did not rush away from the discomfort. He stayed in it, and later that afternoon, when another conversation ended without success, he did not immediately label it as failure. He paused, replayed the moment, and noticed something he had never noticed before. He was not present. He was trying to escape the outcome instead of engaging in the moment, and that realization was small, almost invisible. But it was the first real shift, not in his results, but in his awareness, and for the first time Lucas understood that change was not going to arrive all at once. It was going to begin in moments so small most people would ignore them, But he did not ignore this one, he held on to it, because deep down he knew this was the beginning of something different. Days turned into a pattern. Lucas woke up earlier not because he suddenly became disciplined, but because he had given himself something to return to. He would sit at the edge of his bed with the scroll in his hands and read the same words again, slowly, clearly, sometimes out loud, sometimes in a whisper, until the sentence no longer felt like something he was reading, but something he was stepping into. At first, nothing outside changed. The same doors closed, the same conversations ended quickly, the same looks of disinterest met him wherever he went. And there were moments when doubt came back stronger than before, telling him, "This is pointless, you are doing the same thing again," expecting something different. But this time Lucas did not run from that voice. He noticed it, he listened to it. And then he returned to the words again, not to silence the doubt, but to continue anyway. One afternoon, he walked into a small electronics shop, not expecting anything different, just another attempt. The owner barely looked up at him. "What do you want?" Lucas felt the old reaction rise, the urge to speak fast, to impress, to prove something. But instead he paused for just a second, long enough to remember the line he had been repeating for days. Words repeated shaped the man, and he realized this moment was not about getting the job. It was about becoming the person he had been practicing in private. He spoke slower this time, not perfect, but steady. He asked a question instead of rushing into a pitch. The owner gave a short answer, and for once Lucas stayed present instead of thinking about what to say next. He listened. The conversation lasted longer than usual, not because he said something extraordinary, but because he did not break under the silence. When he left, he did not have the job, but something felt different. The interaction had not drained him, it had not confirmed his failure, it had simply been a moment. And that night, when he returned home, he read the scroll again, but this time he did not feel like he was chasing change. He felt like he was building something small and invisible. The next day, he repeated the same process, then the next, and the next. Some days felt pointless, some days felt slightly better, and then one morning something unexpected happened. A customer at a small street stand where Lucas was helping for a few hours paused after he spoke, and instead of walking away, asked a second question. It was a simple question, nothing significant, but to Lucas it felt like a crack in a wall that had always been solid. He answered carefully, not rushing, not overthinking, and when the customer nodded and made a purchase, it was not the money that stayed with him, it was the realization that for the first time something had responded to him differently. And as he stood there holding a few dollars in his hand, he understood that the change he had been waiting for was not going to arrive as a dramatic moment. It was already happening in pieces, so small most people would miss them. But Lucas did not miss this one, because he knew this was the first real sign that he was no longer the same person who had walked into that bookstore. That small moment could have been easy to dismiss, just another lucky interaction, just a coincidence. But Lucas did not let it pass like everything else he had ignored before. He returned home that night, sat down in the same chair, and unrolled the scroll again. But this time he read it with a different kind of attention, not searching for something new, but recognizing something that had already begun to change inside him. Words repeated shaped the man, he whispered slowly, and for the first time those words did not feel like instructions. They felt like a mirror showing him who he was becoming. Over the next days, Lucas continued the same routine, waking up, reading, repeating, stepping into the day with the same quiet focus. And while the world around him still looked mostly the same, something inside him was stabilizing. He was no longer swinging between hope and disappointment. He was building something steadier, something that did not disappear after a bad interaction, but change did not move in a straight line. One afternoon he walked into a larger store, a place he had tried before and failed before. The same manager stood behind the counter, glanced at him, and recognized him almost immediately. "You again." The tone was not welcoming. Lucas felt the old tension return, the urge to retreat, to protect himself from another rejection, but he paused just long enough to catch that reaction before it controlled him. He remembered the countless times he had let that moment decide everything, and instead of leaving he stayed, not to prove anything, but simply to continue being the person he had been practicing becoming. He spoke clearly, introduced himself without rushing, and when the manager cut him off saying, "We are not hiring," Lucas did not argue, he did not shrink. He simply nodded, thanked him, and asked one question: "What would you look for if you were hiring someone?" The manager hesitated, not expecting that question, and for a brief second something shifted. He gave a short answer, not detailed, not friendly, but enough, and Lucas listened carefully, not preparing a response, not trying to impress, just absorbing the information. When he left the store, the result had not changed. He still did not have the job, but the experience was different. He had not lost himself in the moment. He had not let rejection define the interaction, and that difference stayed with him more than any immediate success could have. Later that evening, as he read the scroll again, he realized something important. The scrolls were not giving him new opportunities, they were changing how he showed up to the same opportunities, and because of that the results would not change instantly, but they would change inevitably, and that understanding removed something that had always held him back: the need for immediate proof. He no longer needed to see results to continue, he only needed to stay consistent with who he was becoming. And as that thought settled in, Lucas began to understand that the real transformation was not happening in the moments when things went right, it was happening in the moments when nothing changed, and he continued anyway. And that was something he had never done before. The change did not arrive all at once, it came quietly, almost unnoticed, layered over days that looked ordinary from the outside, but felt different from within. Lucas continued to read the same scroll every morning and every night, not because he was forced to, but because he began to see how each repetition shaped the way he moved through the world. He no longer rushed into conversations trying to win them. He slowed down, he listened, he observed details he had ignored before. The tone in someone's voice, the pause before they answered, the way their attention shifted, and something unexpected started to happen. People did not change instantly, but they stayed longer. They asked one more question, they gave him a few more seconds than before, and those seconds began to add up into something real. Weeks passed, and Lucas found steady work at a small retail shop. Not a big opportunity, not a breakthrough, but a place where he could practice every single day. The owner did not expect much from him at first, just basic tasks: organizing shelves, greeting customers, handling simple sales. But Lucas treated each interaction like it mattered, not because the job was important, but because he was no longer waiting for a big moment to prove himself. He was building himself in small moments that most people ignored. At first his results were average, nothing impressive, but consistent, and that consistency began to stand out. While others had good days and bad days, Lucas became steady. He showed up the same way every day, calm, present, focused. And over time customers began to recognize him. They asked for him by name. They trusted his recommendations, not because he pushed harder, but because he understood better. And one afternoon something happened that would have been impossible just months earlier. A customer walked in looking unsure, comparing products, hesitating the way Lucas himself used to hesitate. And instead of rushing into a pitch, Lucas asked a simple question: what are you really trying to solve? The customer paused, then answered, and Lucas listened fully, not interrupting, not preparing his next line, just understanding. And when he finally spoke, his words were simple, clear, and direct, and for the first time, he felt something different: not nerves, not pressure, but alignment, like his actions matched his intention. The customer nodded, made a decision, and completed the purchase, and as they left they said, "Thank you, that actually helped," and those words stayed with Lucas longer than the sale itself, because he realized this was no longer about convincing people, it was about serving them, and that shift changed everything, not instantly, not dramatically, but fundamentally. He was no longer the person trying to prove his worth, he was becoming someone who created value, and that difference began to show in ways he could not ignore. The owner started giving him more responsibility, more trust, more opportunities to handle larger interactions. And while the outside results were slowly improving, the real change was deeper. Lucas no longer questioned whether he could become someone different. He was already in the process of becoming that person, and for the first time, he understood that the scrolls were never meant to be read. Once they were meant to be lived repeatedly, until the words were no longer separate from who he was, and that realization marked the moment when his growth stopped feeling like effort and started feeling like identity. Opportunities did not suddenly appear out of nowhere, but Lucas began to see them where he had once been blind to them: small moments hidden inside ordinary days. A customer asking a question others ignored, a hesitation that signaled uncertainty, a chance to speak when most people stayed silent. And because he had trained himself to stay present instead of rushing past these moments, he started stepping into them naturally. His numbers improved, not in dramatic leaps, but in steady increments. Week after week his name began to show up at the top of internal reports, not by a wide margin at first, but enough to be noticed. The owner, who once expected very little from him, now watched him with a different kind of attention, not curiosity, but recognition, as if seeing something unfold that could not be rushed. One evening, after closing, the owner handed Lucas a new set of responsibilities: managing higher value transactions, handling more complex customer needs, tasks that required trust, not just effort, and Lucas accepted them without the fear that would have controlled him before, not because the tasks were easier, but because he was no longer the same person facing them. Months passed, and the results that once felt impossible began to feel normal. Consistent performance turned into leadership. Other employees started asking him questions. How do you handle difficult customers? How do you stay calm? How do you know what to say? And Lucas found himself answering in ways that surprised even him, not with techniques or tricks, but with simple observations about paying attention, about listening fully, about staying with a moment instead of escaping it. And one day, a representative from a larger company visited the store, reviewing performance across locations. They watched interactions, quietly taking notes, observing without announcing their purpose. And when they spoke to the owner later that day, Lucas heard his name mentioned more than once, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to understand something was shifting beyond this small store. A few weeks later, Lucas was offered an opportunity to interview for a position he would have once believed was far beyond his reach, a role in a larger organization with higher stakes, higher expectations, and greater visibility. And as he prepared for that interview, he did not search for new strategies. He did not try to become someone else overnight. He returned to what had brought him here, the same scroll, the same words, the same practice repeated day after day. When he walked into that interview room, he did not feel like he needed to prove anything. He simply showed up as the person he had been building consistently. And when questions were asked, he answered clearly. When pauses came, he did not rush to fill them. When uncertainty appeared, he did not avoid it. He engaged with it. And by the end of the conversation, there was a quiet understanding in the room, not expressed directly, but felt clearly that he belonged there. And as Lucas stepped out of that building into the open air, he realized something that would have been impossible for him to understand before. The opportunity had not changed him. He had changed long before the opportunity arrived. And because of that, he was ready for something he once could not even see. The call came on a quiet afternoon, not dramatic, not unexpected, but final. Lucas stood still for a moment, holding the phone, as the voice on the other end confirmed what had already begun to feel inevitable. He had been selected for the position, a role that months ago would have felt unreachable, something reserved for people who were different, more confident, more capable, more certain. But as he ended the call, he did not feel overwhelmed. He did not feel like he had suddenly become someone new. He felt calm because deep down he knew this moment had been built long before. This day he walked outside and the world looked the same streets, the same buildings, the same noise, but he was not the same person walking through it. And that difference was not created in a single moment of success. It had been shaped quietly over time, in mornings when he chose to repeat the same words instead of chasing something new, in conversations where he stayed present instead of retreating, in days when nothing seemed to change. And he continued anyway. Later that evening, Lucas returned to the small bookstore. The bell above the door rang the same way it had the first night. The old man stood behind the counter as if nothing had changed, but when he looked at Lucas, there was a slight nod, not of surprise, but of recognition. Lucas placed the scrolls on the counter carefully, not as something he was returning, but as something he understood now. They did not ask each other what had happened. They did not need to. The man simply asked, did they change anything? Lucas paused for a moment, not searching for the right answer, but acknowledging the truth. They did not change everything, he said slowly. They changed me, and because of that, everything else followed. The man smiled, not broadly, not proudly, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had seen this before. Lucas picked up the scrolls again, this time not as a tool to fix his life, but as a reminder of what had shaped him. And as he stepped back out into the evening, he realized something that would have once sounded too simple to believe. The difference between the life he had lived and the life he was now stepping into was not luck, it was not talent, it was not a single opportunity, it was the decision to stay with something long enough to let it become part of who he was. And most people would never see that part. They would only see the results, the position, the success, the confidence, and assume it appeared suddenly. But Lucas knew the truth. The real change had happened in moments no one noticed, in repetitions no one applauded, in choices that felt small at the time, but became everything over time. And as he walked forward, he no longer wondered if he could become more. He understood that becoming was never about finding the right moment. It was about becoming the right person before the moment arrived.